Hey there everybody, welcome to Tucktuk's Trinkets and Terrain. This week is a bit of a special video. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine reached out and asked if I wanted to do a commission for him. He was looking for me to build one of 3 temples in his capital city in his homebrew world. I agreed, and he sent me this reference photo. You might recognize it from the DuckTales movie. It's the bad guy's castle, I guess. So I looked up a few more images. Sent him back a sketch of a few ideas I had, and after he liked everything and approved it, I set to work. This was a larger build than I was expecting, but I think it turned out pretty cool. It's got a lot of interesting details. Got to play with some weird shapes and things. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and more importantly, so is he. So let's get into it, and I hope you enjoy.
So this is the sketch that I had drawn out based on the reference image. The architecture in the reference is pretty wild. It is a cartoon, so they don't necessarily follow architecture or physics or anything. But so I kind of wanted to keep that idea in mind when I was designing this. But the core foundation is just going to be sort of a block of stone with the 4 towers on top, sort of the main tower, and then the 3 outer towers with walkways in between them. This temple is for the 3 evil-aligned deities in my friend's homebrew world, so I thought that the 3 outer towers could be representative of those 3 deities, with the central tower being sort of a main worship area or something like that. I also wanted to try to keep the curvy nature of the reference image and try to not have any right angles. So for my base, I'm just going to grab a full sheet of chipboard, and then to bulk it out for the central main structure, I just have these sheets of styrofoam that I have glued down to create a tall stack, and I just weighed that down with some books until all the glue was dry, and then trimmed away the excess with my hot wire knife. So this gigantic cup is from the dollar store. This is going to serve as the base structure for my central tower. I honestly do not know why it is this large, but I saw it and figured it would be perfect. And then these 3 tubes are going to form the 3 outer towers. These are from the inside of an area rug, but essentially they're exactly the same diameter as a paper towel roll. They're just a lot thicker. After taking my gigantic cup and indenting it into a spot that I wanted, I cut an indentation in the styrofoam so I could slot the cup into place. And just sort of shoved that in until it was flush with the bottommost layer of styrofoam that you can see here. And then I did exactly the same thing with the 3 outer towers, just pushing them in to give an indent and then cutting away any material that I needed to make them fit and make sure they were standing up straight. I didn't measure anything out, didn't try to make anything even. I intentionally made everything chaotic and random as possible. And then I hot glued everything down so that it would not move around. I then set to work on the door. I cut out a piece of dollar store foam board and peeled off all the burr. You can see in the background I originally was going to do this out of chipboard because I didn't really have a direction that I wanted to go, but after figuring that out, I cut it out of the foam board here. And then keeping the curve sort of theme that I'm going with in mind, I just drew a design on here in a pencil, just carving into the foam. And as soon as I lift my hand up, you can see the final design. Just some circles overlaying each other, with the smaller circles having some unique designs in the middle. I then glued some metal rings into place to create some large handles. And then for just a little bit more detail, I glued some of these round beads in place, just to give the door some more 3-dimensionality. And again, just trying to keep with my overall theme. These beads are not even. I didn't try to make them even. Just trying to keep the more random nature of the reference. So these are from Shifting Lands. I got them when I purchased my Proxon Pro Wire guide. I think they might have been like a freebie or an incentive or something, but they are the perfect size for some windows. So I traced both sizes a bunch of times onto some chipboard, and then cut all those out. Got about 10 each, I believe. I then painted those this light purple color to make it easier down the road. And then after spreading some tacky glue onto the front here, I just pressed that down onto some cross-stitch mesh to give these windows some detail. And I just glued all these down on the same sheet rather than cut out individual pieces of the cross-stitch mesh. That way I could just cut it out once it was all dry, and it would be a lot easier in the long run. One of the great things about this cross-stitch mesh is that it's really easy to cut. You can obviously use a knife here, but it cuts really easy with scissors as well. And after trimming all those up, I had a bunch of windows ready to go. And we're gonna back up a little bit. As you can see, I've done some work on the front there, but first off, I wanted to carve what will be the walkways between the central tower and the outer towers. So this is just some scrap foam, and I carved it into just sort of a round, rough shape. So it reminds me of a potato a little bit. Again, not going for anything even, just lots of curves and chaotic structures. But I cut those to length and dry fitted them in. Once those were all done, I hot glued some dollar store foam board to the front of the structure here. This would create sort of a little courtyard or entryway. I trimmed away the excess, and then I used one of my rollers to create a cobblestone texture. Obviously, the smart thing would have been to do this before gluing it down, but I didn't do that. So I ended up having to go back with a ballpoint pen and go over all of the lines that the roller put in to deepen all of the texture. And with that, the main structure of everything is complete. So this is a joint compound, and I'm just using this to give everything some texture, cover up the styrofoam, make sure it's not gonna chip away and peel and make those awful little balls stick to everything. I ended up running out, went out and got some more, so I went over some areas that I had already did with my last bucket. And while this was wet, I just pushed in my larger windows into the base structure here, and I essentially just covered all of the styrofoam with the joint compound. Again, just trying not to do anything uniformly, making it as chaotic and random as possible. I also stuck my door in place while the joint compound was wet as well. So next up was the longest step. I cut a bunch of bricks out of some XPS foam and then textured them via the tumbler method, which if you're unfamiliar with, you just throw all your bricks in a container of some sort with some pointy rocks and just give it a long, hard shake. Gives all the bricks a really nice natural texture without having to individually texture all of them. While the joint compound was still wet and using some extra here with the brush, I proceeded to frame out all the windows, the door, and then I've added a few random spots of bricks to just add to that random chaotic feel that I was going for. I then used the joint compound to sort of randomly go over areas of the bricks. You can see I've also done the bottommost layer of the towers, as well as these sort of random patches that I did in a few spots. Before continuing on with my towers, I hot glued my walkways into place so that my bricks could frame the walkways and cover up the gaps between the towers and them. And then we'll skip ahead here. I just laid out a bunch of bricks. Super boring to watch, in all honesty. So just skip ahead. You see I've done all the towers, the three outer ones and the center one, just using some white glue so that I have lots of working time. Next up, I cut these shapes out of some XPS foam and then sort of sanded the bottom edge to give it a roundness. And then obviously I cut a hole in the middle so that it would fit over the tower. And then mixed up a bath of water and PVA glue. And then using this styrofoam ball that I had lying around, I'm going to use the old toilet paper trick to create sort of a dome shape that will become the tops of the 3 outer towers. Just making sure to saturate all of the toilet paper and smoosh it down as best I can. Inevitably, this will create a very nice texture going forward that will semi-match the joint compound below. Then once those are dry, they're nice and hard. Just glue those into place on each of the towers with some white glue. I also, in the process of doing the bricks, hot glued my smaller windows randomly across all of the towers, trying again just to be random and make each tower different. For the tower toppers, I just took a few random beads I had and glued them to a toothpick here, and I just stuck that straight down into the top of each tower to give it a bit of an antenna or visual interest rather than just these plain domes. Did my best to keep them straight, and luckily everything is soft enough that it's relatively easy to just pierce the toothpick down into the toilet paper and styrofoam ball. Did the same thing for all 3 towers. And then I finished off the central tower with some more bricks, and that part is all done. I then went back with some more joint compound and filled in some larger gaps, covered my walkways completely with this to sort of tie in the base rough structure with the brick structure of the towers. My thought process here is that maybe this building has been renovated or maybe grown via magic, with the towers being constructed by hand, but then all of the rough textures being manipulated via magic. Now for the top of the central tower, I didn't really know what to do, but I had these water guns from the dollar store that I cut up into their components, and then trying to stick with my curve theme and just trying to make something interesting looking and random. I found every cylinder that I had lying around, cut a piece of foam board, and proceeded to just hot glue these down into sort of a weird structure composed of all these different cylinders. The thickest ones created the center, and then as I got further out, I moved to these smaller cylinder pieces. Not really going for anything in particular here, just wanted to create something that looked interesting, looked different, and something that was sort of grand enough that it would be on the central tower. And then to fill in all of the tubes, I just found some random round beads and hot glued these in place to fill those. And then I had a weird gap somehow in the middle here, so I just grabbed a long dowel and glued that into place and cut it a bit longer than everything else to give it sort of a, I guess you'd call it an antenna look, and then finally attach that piece to the top of my main tower. Next up, I moved on to some more minor details. So these final faction toys are from the dollar store, and then I also had a bunch of these Halloween fangs lying around. I cut off all of the larger fangs from each of these sets, as well as trimmed up these pieces from my final faction toys as well. For the teeth, I thought these could be almost like crenellations along the ridges of the base structure, so I just hot glued this in place around what is technically the corners of the structure, but obviously they're rounded. This just gives some more detail and breaks up the larger areas where there's not really anything interesting going on. You can see I've glued those all around the entire structure wherever it looked good, essentially. And then for my final faction toys, I thought these would help accentuate the central tower. I just glued these right across from each other. With everything done and dried, I moved on to base coating everything with some black paint and Mod Podge mixture to protect everything, give everything a solid coat. While I'm doing that, just want to remind you to please subscribe if you're enjoying this video. I post crafting videos every other week. Please hit the like button if you are enjoying this video. Leave a comment with suggestions or maybe something else that I could have done better or could have done differently. And share this with your friends if you think they'd enjoy it as well. Anything you do is much appreciated. But as far as the paint job goes, while I was at the dollar store picking up my few random items, they had some cheap acrylic paint there, which I thought would be perfect to get because I knew I would need a lot of it. Just grab this purple, and this is by far the worst paint that I have ever worked with. It was really almost chunky, kind of reminded me of like cottage cheese in a way, so it was really hard to spread, and at the same time it was very, very thin. You can see in the video here it looks a lot more purple than it actually is. For that reason the camera really brings out the brightness of the color, but once it dried it was essentially black. It was just really, really awful to work with. I would highly recommend buying literally any other paint. But once that base coat was dry, I grabbed some craft paint. I have these two purples. They were both kind of low, so I figured I would just mix them together. With this, I covered the tops of the towers and then did essentially a heavy overbrush of everything else to give it a deeper purple color. I then decided that I didn't want to do a wash over this. It was already pretty dark, and I didn't do a good job of filling in all the dark crevices with the purple either, so it was already pretty shadowed, so I just moved straight onto a dry brush. I mixed these three colors together to create sort of a light tan color, and then just use that to dry brush everything and really bring out all of the awesome texture that the bricks and the joint compound made. I then used that same color to paint the little teeth spikes around everything, as well as the sort of tower topper spikes. I then used this gold to paint the tower tops, as well as the central tower structure here. I also painted the door gold. For the window grating, I just used this silver to really make them stand out against the darker colors. And then painted the outside cobblestone area, my standard stone color, so just a gray, dry brush with lighter gray, and then a random dry brush with tan. Once all of that was dry, I used my homemade black wash to cover everything except for the structure itself. So the door, the tower tops, all of the spiky bits, as well as the cobblestone entranceway. And with that, painting is all done. So next I wanted to add some moss over the structure. So I grabbed some parsley flakes, and similar to my last video where we made the vines on the Guardian of the Forest, I'm going to mash these up in my newly acquired mortar and pestle. I mixed in a little bit of this yellow static grass. This obviously wouldn't break down because it's synthetic, but it would give it some nice color. So I mashed that up, mixed in a bit of PVA glue, and got this nice thick mixture that I then spread all over the structure, making sure to keep it as thin as possible. This building is in a large capital city, so I figured that they would clean it on a fairly regular basis, but I still wanted to break up the purple with a different color, and I figured this would be like maybe new growth or really stubborn lichens and things like that. And then one last detail, I found these beads at Michael's in their clearance section. I think they actually might be real crystals, or real rock at least, but I'm going to use these to give all of the joint compound areas more detail and more features. So I just used a pencil, poke some holes, and then just use a bit of tag glue to hold it in place. These crystals kind of play into my idea that the base structure and the walkways were grown via magic, and that magic caused these crystalline structures to exponentially grow from the rock or material or whatever they're using. But once everything was dry, everything was stuck in place, this is the final result. I apologize for the vertical view here. It is a very large structure. I used my phone to film, so couldn't get anything in very easily, but I wanted to show it to you all in context, and then I'll do a close-up here in a sec. You can see the green really helps break up all of the purple, but all of the texture really stands out with the dry brush. I think it looks really awesome, and I'm really glad that my friend does as well. I now just have to figure out how to ship this to him. Don't forget to subscribe if you did enjoy this video. I really would appreciate it. I do have an Instagram account if you're interested in checking that out. I post work in progress pictures, other projects that I'm working on, mostly just crafting things in general. I also have an Etsy shop if you're interested in picking up some dungeon tiles or various dungeon accessories. If you don't craft or don't have access to materials or whatnot, if you're interested in either of those, you can find the links for those in the description. But more than anything, thank you so much for stopping by. Hope to see you next time.